What is up, everyone? Welcome to the video. Let's talk Explorer. All right, Explorer is the newest Magic Arena format, Wizards of the Coast has added to the game not too long ago, a couple weeks ago. And this format is meant to be a format that gets us closer and closer to Pioneer on Magic Arena. It's more sort of a transitionary format, if you will. And Wizards of the Coast have committed to adding cards to the format over the coming months to get us to a point where we can just call it Pioneer. Now, the format, as I've been playing a ton of it, and it's been really fun. I've been enjoying it a ton. It's fairly diverse, and there's a lot of decks that you can really kind of build with, even just the limited card pool that we have on Arena. But that being said, we did see Winota get banned. It was taking up a lot of metagame. We would see a lot of it, and also Tybalt's Trickery got banned, mostly for best of one reasons. But we're not going to really count too much. But we do know that these cards are eventually going to get unbanned as the card pool on Arena gets closer and closer and closer to Pioneer, and the metagame is able to compensate and adjust to handle these cards a lot better, how they do in the Pioneer format. So we know that, again, like I said, Wizards is going to be adding cards to the format, and the vehicle they're going to be doing that in the coming months here is going to be Historic Anthology 6. Now, they said that it's going to be mostly Explorer focused, but then there's going to be a couple of historic cards thrown in there. And typically, historic anthologies have been around 25-ish or so cards. And I expect this one, being a little bit of a different scope than just a regular historic anthology, is going to be anywhere between 25 and 30 cards. So in this video, we're going to go ahead and talk through my wish list or my picks for cards I would like to see in Historic Anthology 6. Obviously, these cards are all going to be added into the game at some point anyways, but I think that there is an ordering at which that Wizards can put these cards in and really kind of help promote diversity within the format and push it closer to Pioneer faster, right? So we're going to go through it each by color and talk about some of the cards. I have about 3-ish per the individual colors. Multicolor obviously gets a few more options, and then lands, there's a few there. So let's get right into it. Now, looking here at the metagame page for MTG Goldfish, Pioneer looks pretty good, right? It looks fairly diverse, even with, Winota being at a 14% win rate. The format is still holding strong. You can win pretty much with any deck as long as you know how to play your deck well. And so, that's generally the sign of a very healthy metagame, but there's no like drastic outliers. The curve is fairly linear on its way down into the 1%ers, 2%ers here. So generally a sign of a very good format. And personally, I think that getting Explorer to this kind of a state sooner is just a good thing for players, and it also just makes the format a little bit easier to manage on Wizards' part, right? Because right now they're kind of having to manage two different formats. They're managing Pioneer on its own, they're managing Explorer on its own. If they get it closer to together, then they can start managing it as one format sooner. So let's get into the cards. So first off here with red, I think first thing is Monastery Swiftspear. I think this is a card that many people, all the red mages, have been asking for a long time to be added into the game. One of the strongest one-drop red creatures that you could have in Pioneer, and subsequently would be in Explorer as well. Haste and Prowess, things that you just want to have. This goes in a bunch of different decks from mono red to Boros aggro. And Boros aggro, I think, has started to see some resurgence due to some of the additions that we got from Streets of New Capenna and Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. So Swiftspear definitely up there on the list. I think this is probably the strongest red card they could add by a country mile. So I guess we'll have to see where they end up, but this is definitely one of them. And I think that also this would see player in Explorer or in Historic as well too. So just kind of double dipping on that. So definitely a great add. But if in tandem with the Monastery Swiftspear, we also have Eidolon of the Great Revel, another kind of just staple mono red aggro card across formats, whether that's modern or Pioneer. And really, this is just securing damage across your opponent. So you play this thing on 2. Your opponent starts to try to cast some spells. If they remove it, it's going to deal at least 2 damage. But if they have to deal, play a bunch of creatures or what have you, it's going to start chipping in some significant damage, and then we could just finish them off with either our aggressive creatures or burn spells, right? So another strong addition. And really what these two cards really add to the format right now is in Explorer, there really isn't a de facto aggro deck, right? There was Winota, but Winota's kind of a combo deck. We kind of have the Greasefang decks that are also kind of more like a combo deck. And then outside of that, you have like your blue white control, you have um, you have your fires decks, you have some there's a bunch of different things, but really there's a kind of a lacking of just kind of your traditional go fast aggro, one curve out 1 2 3 and get there sort of thing. The mono red decks that exist in the best of one format are not really quite that good per se. They're not really that strong. They could be a lot better with these two additions. So definitely would like to see these two kind of make their way in Historic Anthology 6. But the last red card I have is Collective Defiance. Now, Collective Defiance is really only seeing play in one or two decks, as far as I know, in particularly in Phoenix, which Phoenix right now is not in a great place. I mean, they're having to really find creative ways to play the deck, and they're using things like Ledger Shredder, which is a good card. Don't get me wrong, but it's definitely strayed away from kind of what the Phoenix decks of the Pioneer format look like. Collective Defiance is a very versatile spell, and it also, it allows you to, discard and draw cards, which is fantastic, which generally, Phoenix decks will want to try to find and chain spells. Dealing damage, also to 4 damage to a creature is pretty good as well too in this format particularly. Does work against things like, Winotas and whatnot, but it's generally a good card, and would be one that I would like to also see kind of added in as well here. So that takes care of red. Let's go into green. Green, we're going to start off with Elvish Mystic. So now we have Llanowar Elves in the format already, but giving green this sort of source of redundant ramp creature mana, I think is really something that we need. We have Gilded Goose, but really Gilded Goose is not nearly as good as Elvish Mystic is. And it's a fairly easy one to add in. It's just a reskin of Llanowar Elves, so should be a fairly easy include. I have high expectations that that Elvish Mystic makes its way in Historic Anthology 6. The next one that we're going to have here is Sylvan Caryatid. Again, another source of creature ramp that I think is kind of really missing. Our 2 mana creature ramp options are fairly limited in Explorer. Really, we're kind of limited to some of the enchantment. There's like Paradise Druid. There's a few options, but nothing quite as good as Sylvan Caryatid. Sylvan Caryatid blocks really well. It's got hexproof. So I think this one needs to come in. And again, this is to really support the mono green mid range decks, or also the mono green storm decks as well. And this also sets up the ability to have Jeskai Ascendancy combo come into the format as well. That is a deck that exists in Pioneer, but I think it takes a few too many cards that could be afforded to other cards at this stage to get that in. But at least this is a step that is that helps a few different other decks, as well as some of the random combo decks. So good one here. And in the similar vein to some of the mono green storm deck, I think the Nissa is just kind of a personal pick for me. I don't know that this would necessarily have high chances of making it in right away. But for the mono green storm deck, it's a very different kind of deck to anything that we are really seeing in Explorer at this point. So having something like this this is really actually one of the big 2-ish cards, like 2 cards for the mono green storm deck that really helps pull it all together. So this is one that I think I would like to see. It isn't a staple in the format outside of that deck, but that deck is seeing quite a bit of play. I think it's about 10% of the metagame share on Goldfish. So it could be a consideration, I would say. So very cool card, but yeah, would love to see this one. Next up in blue, we'll move over here. So for blue, we have Thing in the Ice to start off. So Thing in the Ice, one of Izzet Phoenix's and Izzet Control's mainstay payoff creatures. It is a beefy 7/8 on the flip side when you can transform it, which is very easy to do. Removing ice counters, 4 ice counters is no large task for those kinds of decks. They're playing a lot of cheap cantrips and removal spells, so it's generally pretty easy to make that happen. And again, like I said, Izzet Phoenix is really kind of struggling. And so, that particular deck, and I think the Izzet control deck itself is a bit different than kind of the other control decks that we see in Explorer at the moment. So having something like Thing in the Ice to really push those decks up in viability, I think is a huge, huge win, and would love to see this one as well. Also, Mausoleum Wanderer, I think, is another card that we have a deck that kind of exists. This is the Mono Blue Tempo deck and the Mono Blue Spirits deck. and it's okay. It's pretty good. It's got most of its pieces, but it is missing this one, which is a um, pretty important piece of that puzzle. Generally speaking, the creatures in that deck are really small, and so obviously with it being with it being able to get beefed up by other creatures that enter play that you're playing at instant speed, and then having the ability to also counter something massive like a major board wipe and save your entire creature suite, and also being able to retain cards in hand as well. Like generally speaking, you want this card. So I expect this one to maybe make its way in as well, just because it is a singular missing piece from the Mono Blue Spirits deck that just completes it overall. And lastly, may not necessarily be a competitive pick for Explorer, but Jace Vryn's Prodigy is my last card that I have for blue here. One of the most powerful cards when it was in standard. It was one of the most expensive cards in control decks. And while I don't necessarily know that it will see a ton of play in the Explorer metagame, it's very possible it could. But where I do think that this could make some headways in Historic, for the sake of that, it could slot into something like a blue-white control, or what have you, right? So Jace Vryn's Prodigy, again, like I said, not gonna probably be making major waves, but could be a very cool include. This was a big fan favorite back in the day, so could be a very cool card to add here. Let's go on to black now. Black, Kalidas, Trader of Get. I think Kalidas is one of the most impactful black cards that we don't have in the format right now. Realistically, black has a lot of the cards that it wants already. Really, this is like really the major one, and even so, this isn't even seeing play in like all the sideboards or anything, or on the main decks. It is seeing play in sideboards, and some main decks play this card, but it is one card that I think we really want to have in this format. It's just a fantastic way to deal with creature decks. It's a decent blocker on its own for its cost. It's a lifelink, and it also exiles and makes our opponent's creatures and makes zombies for us. So generally, you want this card in things like your Rakdos mid-range decks. You want this probably in your mono black aggro decks, your mono black devotion decks. You probably are playing this in Jund somewhere. So realistically, this card will definitely make waves when it gets added in, but I think that it should be here sooner rather than later. And speaking of mono black aggro, Blood-Soaked Champion is another one drop that we just don't have. A very powerful one drop in its own right. We do have some one drop zombies that could see play, but nothing quite as good as this. It has a ton of in a similar fashion to something like Dread Wanderer. It has the ability to recur itself from the graveyard. So just as again, a very, another one drop to really solidify that mono black aggro archetype. Last black card I have is Collective Brutality. So Collective Brutality is one of those cards that it is a staple it was a staple in Modern for a long time. It's still used, sparingly today, but it is one of these cards where it is a very powerful early and mid game tool, to be able to deal with some creatures or potentially, rip some cards out of your opponent's hand. Following this up, turn 1 Thoughtseize, turn 2 Collective Brutality, just ripping your opponent's hand apart is really strong. And we see Thoughtseize used a lot. This would see play in the Rakdos mid-range decks. This would see play, maybe potentially bring traditional Jund maybe potentially back into the fold as well. But again, this is a very strong card. Again, it may not make a ton of waves right off the bat, but it is definitely a card to think about, and could be an easy include just because it is a card that some people play, but it's not like a format breaking staple or anything. Moving on to the white cards here, Chain to the Rocks, one of the for the Fires of Invention decks. This is a card that is sorely missed in those formats. Now we have, or in that decks, we have some decent replacements. In March and Otherworldly Light and Portable Hole, but not quite to the same extent that Chain to the Rocks does. It's probably, it does a lot of things. You have to put it on a mountain, sure, but it just gets rid of a creature altogether. And usually for this kind of effect, we're looking at something in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 mana. So for it being 1 cost and an enchantment that we can utilize, early on in Fire's decks to stay alive, really big thing. So I think this is one to add in for sure. This is a pretty easy include. Again, Fire's decks right now not doing the best, and while this may not necessarily tip the scales in the Fires deck's favor. It's just a nice piece to complete that deck, because I think literally this is the only card missing from most of the Fires builds out there. Favorite Hoplite is the next white card here. So Favorite Hoplite, again, on the same front as the mono or the Boros aggro decks, as well as probably mono white aggro as well. But Boros aggro really looks to play this card. It's just the fact of not having the kind of those de facto aggro decks in the format really kind of comes down to just the fact that we don't have good one drops really for a lot of these decks to do. Those decks really need to get on the board early. Favorite Hoplite being one, a decent blocker, but then also having a really strong ability that you can instant speed target it, put a counter on it, and then prevent the damage that would be dealt to it. It can attack or block favorably, pretty well. And so, yeah, I just need to have it in. Again, this is not a format breaking card. This should be an easy include, and it's an uncommon. So, it kind of fits into the, the rarity breakdown of the anthology. Lastly, I have Thalia's Lancers. So Thalia's Lancers, for me, this is a card where, again, this is seen in really only one deck, I think, at this point. And that is the mono white Yorion Devotion deck, where you want to use it to search up something like Emrakul, or you want to search up something like Golos, and get that into your hand so that you can cast it off of your Nykthoses and stuff. Again, but we don't have that in the format, so those decks really can't exist, and you have to kind of really heavily retool them to be able to, kind of have them work in the Explorer format. So Thalia's Lancers, again, not a hugely contentious pick, I don't think, by any stretch, but one that would allow mono white to, the mono white Devotion to have just another tool to search through its library. It is that deck is a Yorion deck, so it is it is an 80 carder, so it is one where you definitely want to have your outlets to be able to search and dig up your specific answers you need. So yeah, Thalia's Lancer is a good one. Let's move on to the multicolored stuff. Voice of Resurgence is the first one. I think this is really primarily seen in the Winota decks in the format, in Pioneer. Obviously, because Winota got banned right now, this won't really be doing too much right out of the gate, but it is a good card nonetheless. And then when Winota does eventually get unbanned, which we supposedly is going to be happening when Dominaria United comes out in September, this would be a good addition to add into the deck. There are some cards that we have to kind of substitute in to make the deck function in Explorer. Not really a big concession, but having something like Voice of Resurgence, being able to create it itself, being a Winota enabler, and create a really massive creature on the back end, especially if we're attacking and our opponent decides they want to try to do something to kill the Winota. Well, hey, we get a bigger creature on the backside of that. So pretty strong card, definitely one that I would like to see added right off the bat, and to explore. And we don't really have a card kind of like this at all, so definitely one I would love to see. Next up is Supreme Verdict. So Supreme Verdict is one of the last missing pieces for the blue-white control decks, and I think this is one of the cards that keeps things like the blue-white or the mono-blue tempo decks kind of in check to some extent. This also just is a dead ringer for just one of the best removal board wipes in the game overall. Now it is something that, for a lot of the decks that are out there, the Rakdos decks and all the creature decks that this would particularly hate on, they're really not playing counter magic. So this is just another sweeper. And yes, we have, substitutions for those, but really particularly against, decks that have some amount of counter magic to them, potentially things like, Phoenix or again, like I said, the mono blue Spirits deck. This is a card that, we want to have, and it should be a fairly easy inclusion. Again, considering that we do have a lot of existing potential replacements, but nothing quite as good. This could be just one to just throw in and get it added in. Next up, Reflector Mage. So Reflector Mage is this is a card that was banned in Standard for a while, surprisingly for no good reason, let's be honest. But it is a very powerful card, and it is one that I think could help turn the Humans deck into a real deck. We have Collected Company in the format already. We have a lot of the humans that go into the 4-color, 5-color humans lists already in the format. And so being able to have this very powerful removal tool is just one that I think could make a lot of sense. It's an uncommon. It's not very hard to, to slot this in. And so this would just kind of help maybe bolster those decks. We don't even see those kinds of decks. We don't even see Collected Company decks really all too much at this stage of the game in Explorer. So giving them some tools to potentially bring that up as into the format would be nice. Boros Charm comes in next. So Boros Charm, again, this goes into the Boros aggro decks. This goes into the burn decks. This is one of the best burn spells ever printed. But also it's just a very strong and versatile card, giving our permanents indestructible, giving our creatures a creature double strike, which is also pretty good as well. So this should just be a fairly easy include. Even if we say like only get either Swift Spear or Eidolon, Boros Charm I think needs to be in the format. This again will service particularly the Boros aggro decks and the burn decks that don't exist. Like burn decks have not existed really in Explorer, and even really all that much in Historic for that matter. So this is a card that really needs to be added in. Spell Queller comes next up here. So again, so with the Mono Blue Spirits deck, the Bant Spirits deck is also another player in the Explorer or in Pioneer, and should honestly be in Explorer as well. Between Mausoleum Wanderer and this card, these are really the only two pieces that are missing out of those that deck. And it's a very good a really good cool deck. And it's a fairly easy one. This is one I think also people have been asking for quite a bit for a long time. So this should be a fairly easy inclusion as well. It's not terribly broken or powerful. The Bant Spirits deck isn't like a majorly top contender, but it is still doing well. It's still a contender for fighting for top positions in places. So this one should be a nice inclusionary card as well. Lastly, here we have 3 lands to talk about, and then we're done here. So first up, Urborg. Urborg is a card, that's a land that makes everything swamps, right? All your land swamps. And it is just really, it's the missing piece for quite a lot of decks. There's a lot of decks in the format, like Greasefang, for example, Rakdos, they only play one Urborg, and that's it. And that's really the only piece that's changed out of their list. And so, it's a fairly easy inclusion. There isn't anything really crazily broken or anything that we can do with it, even at this stage of the game. So, we have ways to deal with lands, Field of Ruin and things of that sort that are seeing play. So, not a hard choice to include Urborg in the land spot, one of the land spots anyways in HA6. Also, similarly, Mana Confluence, again, just kind of used as a one of, something to smooth mana over. You're taking a little bit of life. It's not crazily powerful or anything by any means. So it is something that I think will make its way in again, just to help smooth out mana across various decks. Now, this last land is one that is potentially a bit more contentious, and that is Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx. Now, Nykthos is a very, very powerful card, and it enables a lot of decks in Pioneer. So it's enabling the mono green ramp storm sort of deck with the Planeswalkers and stuff. It's enabling mono black devotion, mono white devotion as well. So it's really seen in those 3 decks. Mono green obviously being the best of the 3, but mono black and mono white, are around. But I think that Nykthos is something where, we have a solution. We have a replacement for this in Nyx Lotus. Obviously nowhere near as good. It's way slower to get going and get online. But it takes up just a permanent slot in your deck. Whereas Nykthos is not, it's just a land. So it is something where Nykthos may not make it right away, but I have a feeling though that if a lot of the cards that we talked about today are added into the format, Nykthos being added in isn't the worst thing. I think a lot of the decks benefit greatly from the power that they've gained from the cards that we talked about. And I think also potentially unbanning Winota as well to kind of counteract and have that be sort of the check and balance of the format. Really will make it so that Nykthos would be okay to add in nice and early, so that, those mono green devotion storm decks and the mono black devotion decks and stuff like that, those can start to see some play and get off the ground, because really those are becoming a big player in Pioneer. And so, it would be cool to see that kind of be a player in Explorer and give us the option to play with that mechanic in Explorer as well. So that's it. Those are our cards here that we have for, predictions, wish lists, whatever you want to call it, for Historic Anthology 6. That should be coming out. I believe they said in the summer. I'm guessing in July it will be coming out. Let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. What cards do you want to see added in to Historic Anthology 6 right off the bat, just to make Pioneer feel the best for you? Let me know what you think of my list, and drop a like on the video if you liked it, subs if you loved what we're doing over here, Ring the bell, stay notified when we're uploading content to the channel. And otherwise, thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you guys in the next one.